Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab. We are here to support you on your biometrics journey, giving you the tools and knowledge you need to grow from lead to leader. Our topic today, 20 things your medical writer wants you to know. Thank you for joining us live, and if you are watching a replay, thank you for taking the time to catch up. You can ask questions on the event notice on LinkedIn, and we will see them. However, we can't respond in writing during the broadcast. If we don't get to your question, look for an answer after the event or in an upcoming edition of our newsletter. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and my panelists. I am Amanda Cross, founder of Crossfield Coaching and Consulting, an executive biometrics consulting agency dedicated to helping small to mid-sized companies and teams deliver biometrics in a better way. With decades of experience in clinical research, from statistician to chief operating officer, I leverage my cross-functional experience and training to help teams integrate, communicate, and collaborate to improve their service delivery, as well as helping functional leaders professionally develop themselves and their teams. I also support creating and refining biometrics messaging, positioning, and presentation in the marketplace. With me today, I have Jules Kovacevic, who is Senior Director of Medical Writing at Worldwide Clinical Trials, where she heads up the global team of medical writers, document specialists, and transparency and disclosure specialists. She has successfully developed and launched a program for assistant and associate medical writers, helping new writers to develop their careers. In addition to her day job, Jules is active in the European Medical Writers Association, where she serves on the executive committee, job sharing the education officer role, leading the professional development committee, and chairing the regulatory special interest group. I also have Anne McDonough. Anne has worked in clinical research and development for over 30 years and has spent the last 16 years working as a freelance writer. Anne writes across the full spectrum of regulatory documents, such as protocols, clinical study reports, and lay summaries, and program-wide and submission documents such as investigator brochures, DSURs, and CTD modules. Anne's current practice primarily supports small biotech companies, and her experience as a freelancer is going to bring a unique and valuable viewpoint to our discussion today. Welcome, Jules and Anne. Before we get started, we want to just level set where our conversation's going today and talk about what is a medical writer anyway, and what do they do, and what do they bring to the team. So, Jules, I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, I just want to mention that there are many types of medical writer. There's not just a one size fits all type of medical writer. So we have freelance medical writers might be able to do all aspects of medical writing, but when you're working with a department, they tend to have specialisms. So you have the medcoms writers who will specialize in the manuscripts, abstracts, posters, presentations. Obviously, they're working with the statisticians for the results of the trials. You have the safety writers who will be writing within the study on annual safety reports or DSURs. They will also work on aggregate reports after the study has finished on the post-marketing writing. And then you have the regulatory writers, which is where we have the most interaction with the other biometrics functions. We work on the pre-IND, the IND writing. We do the protocols, the IBs, the IMPDs, the list goes on, the CSR, the ICFs, and then we're working on the documents, the modules for the authorization. So we're working with all the departments within biometrics during our regulatory writing. And Anne will explain what medical writers actually do within that process.
Great. Thank you, Jules. So the questions I want to answer for you are, what is the role of the medical writer? What are our responsibilities, and what expertise do we bring to the table? So I know as a medical writer that a lot of people, and maybe some of you even who are viewing the podcast, the webcast, think that medical writers are basically glorified word processors. I've actually had colleagues and clients say this to my face. And that we're just doing some mindless combination of cut and paste and formatting and spell check. But I think first and foremost, medical writers are storytellers. We're telling stories like which animal testing was done and how does that support the first use in humans? What happened in that clinical trial and what does that mean? How was the clinical development program conducted over the last 10 years or 15 years or 20 years? And why were various choices made at those times? And like many classic stories, much medical writing, we're looking for the same happy ending, the same happily ever after, and that is that the product has a positive balance of benefit and risk in the population who'll use it. That's sort of always the overriding message we're hoping to get to. But like all of our classic fairy tales, each road to get there has a very different and often very long and complicated, and therefore it's not cut and paste. Each regulatory document requires the writer to craft a unique and customized story that's going to persuade a regulatory agency or some other type of authority to agree to something, such as allowing research humans to start, such as allowing the licensing of a new medical device or including a new vaccine in the national immunization program, or maybe moving an existing drug to use in children. So just a few of the skills that are required are strategical thinking, problem solving, team leadership, and critical reading. And we need to have expertise in the required format and content of regulatory documents, clinical R&D methodology, statistics interpretation, and yes, not least, a stunning proficiency in Microsoft Word. It's true, of course, that we start with documents that are sources for the work we do, like the protocols and staffs and SAPs and statistical output that many of you produce, that all of you, I suppose, produce. But we have to craft a clear and cogent persuasion piece, essentially, from lots of pieces that were not necessarily designed or written with that end in sight. So I'm going to turn it back to Amanda to lead us in a conversation about 20 things we medical writers would like you to know to help us do that.
Thanks so much, Anne. And we have grouped these 20 points into various categories. And the first category up is protocol review. So these are tips for how you as a data manager or a statistician or even a programmer can read a protocol and review it and give appropriate feedback to medical writing. So first up, can you build a case report form that collects the data described and enables the analysis as described? Jules, Anne, any comment on that?
I think it's really important for data managers, I think, who are sometimes lost as to why they're given this protocol, what are they supposed to review, is to think about the data structures and library forms. And I apologize if I'm not speaking your language or if I'm using terms incorrectly, but think about how you will actually collect these data. Do you have the tools to do it? And if not, you need to feed that back.
Yeah, we rely on the data manager, especially who are building the CRF, to give us the feedback on what we think we've written and how that it can be translated into the CRF.
And I think closely related to that is point number 2, which is, are the collection needs described in enough detail to guide CRF design?
Yeah, I used to actually work for a company in which the data management department had a standard that they refused to put anything into the CRF that wasn't written in the protocol. And I still think back to this 20 years later, and I think it's what taught me to write a good protocol. If you don't see the detail that you need, I mean, the standard that I try to think of in my head is that, of course, we're a team and we'll communicate. But my standard is you should be able to build a database without ever speaking to me again. It should all be in the protocol. And if it isn't, ask for it.
And that also feeds back to our stats colleagues as well, because once they're reading the CRF, they can see that the data is being captured to be able to produce the TFLs, the stats programmers as well, to produce the data that we're needing for answers for the endpoints.
Are statistical analyses appropriate to data collected in the objectives and endpoints? And I think this is a great question, and I want to invite both of you to comment on how you get to a protocol version with statistical components to it if you haven't even had a statistician working on it yet. So maybe discuss this from that angle.
I write a lot of protocols, and so particularly when I'm working with one client or sort of one kind of product for a long time, I'm pretty familiar with what it's going to look like. However, absolutely not a statistician, absolutely not a programmer. So I'm writing in pretty broad details and hoping they're right. And I dearly am very indebted to the review by those people to make sure it is right the first time.
And I think you find a lot of clients will have written the endpoints, the objectives, and we can go through it and correct them to the point that we think are correct. But we always need the statistician to tell us, okay, yes, you're nearly there, but let's finesse this and make it absolutely correct from a statistical point of view. We are not statisticians. We never claim to be statisticians. We have an understanding of statistics, but we're not statisticians. They are the experts.
Next up, which is point number 4, is can you perform the required analyses from the data collected as described in the protocol?
I think this goes back to the CRF as well, the discussion we were having. The statistician has to review the CRF to make sure that they're getting the data points, and also then review the protocol from a statistics point of view, that the endpoints, the objectives are written in the way that the client is going to get the results that they're looking for. I'm not obviously talking positive or negative, but that it's highlighting and bringing out that data.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that the CRF build and particularly not SAP writing are not the time and place to figure this out. It needs to be right in the protocol. And the reason for that, obviously, other than it being right and being done the right way, is that in the CSR, we have to write a section about changes from the planned analyses, i.e. what was in the protocol, to what was actually done in the SAP. And I have, and I'm probably Jules has as well, had to write basically in a nice way. We had to change all the statistical analysis because they were crap. And you have to figure out a way to say that doesn't undermine the study design and the CSR and all of that. But it happens because we have inadequate statistical and DM review of a protocol. And it gets to the SAP and they change everything.
And last one under protocol review, do you understand how all the data collected will be summarized or analyzed? And I apologize for the typo on the screen. But just do we know how the data that's being collected is going to actually be used?
That should all be clearly stated within the protocol and the SAP as well. But in the protocol, that should be definitely detailed. And this brings around to the point why a medical writer should be writing your protocol. Because if, and no disrespect to medics, they are wonderful at the medic side of things. Medical writers know who to bring in to those protocols to make sure that the CRF is going to be built properly, that the SAP can be written based on the protocol, that you're not going to have multiple changes to your analysis because the statistical section hasn't been written correctly. You've got the medical writer who has the experience of looking at all of these things and making sure that you get it right for the first time. Obviously, protocol amendments happen, but hopefully with a medical writer involved in the protocol writing, those should be minimized.
And also remember that the protocol is not just there to tell the investigational site how to do the study. It also has to go through a regulatory review in some places and an ethics committee review. So although some people think there should be no stats in the protocol and say, oh, we'll write it later, we'll figure it out later, I think that's wrong, because it can lead you to collecting your data poorly or in a wrong way. But also the people in ethics committees and certainly in regulators have this level of expertise, and they will be looking to see, is it ethical to do your study? Are you collecting data that you really will be able to use?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And so I just want to reemphasize, if you're a statistician, you've probably done a tremendous number of protocol reviews, so a lot of this might be review. I think data management is a great place to highlight here on how to handle the data review, because I've come across a lot of data managers who will read like the data collection section just to see anything interesting there, but miss on the more thorough review of the points that you two have highlighted, which is, can you actually design a CRF to collect this data? Is the data described in enough detail to help you collect or design the case report form? And I would argue, if it's not described in enough detail to design a CRF, is it really described in enough detail to adequately declare how you're going to analyze it and how you're going to satisfy the needs of the objectives? So, give it a good read. I think that hopefully, I would always say, if a document lands on my desk, I'm going to review every last part of it to my heart's content. And I think that a great opportunity to do so. We are going to move on to the second group, which is your protocol, once written and finalized and in play, is actually now a reference for you to use as you go around about the rest of the work in biometrics. So just making sure that everything is consistent. You're going to have a lot of documents that are prepared off the basis of this case report of the protocol. So Ann, Jules, any comments on what you've seen or points to watch out for here?
Well, you've given a couple of examples there. Another important terminology is the sex and gender. Those terms mean different things, and hopefully in the protocol the right one was chosen to describe what you want to do. But I would just sort of beg people in the biometric field to pay attention to the language in the protocol. There are specific terms were probably chosen for a specific reason. So if you don't understand what that reason is and you think another term is better, please ask and please suggest. We very much might have picked the wrong word, but if not, just please use what's there. There's probably a reason for it.
So what happens if somebody's used subjects in the protocol and is then using patients in a CRF and participants in the TFLs? What does that look like on the back end?
Well, it causes confusion. We like to have, medical writers are all about consistency. We like to have all our documents lined up and consistent, because ultimately they're all going to end up in the submission package, which has to be consistent. So you would like for participant, which is the ICH, not requirement, but the suggestion now is that everyone is a participant. So participant to be in the protocol, it then is in the CRF, it's then in the TFLs, and it's then in your CSR. So it follows through. It's all about consistency.
And I think that the reason for consistency is that it looks sloppy. The part of it is confusion, as Jules has said, but it also looks sloppy. It looks like lack of oversight. It looks like someone who's not paying attention across the board. And when you're trying to write a persuasive document about your drug or your device or your vaccine or your product, sloppiness does not help your arguments, or apparent sloppiness, even if it isn't real sloppiness.
And that could also be, it's not only the subject, patients, participants, the data safety monitoring board might be called different things during the study. If you've got a particular compound, you would want that body to be called the same thing all the way through. And phases of studies, they might call it run-in, or they might call it screening. They might have different terminology. Try and keep everything the same all the way through, and that has to be reflected in the TFLs, obviously, and in the CRF.
Okay, this is a great one. Take care when copying from documents. Back in the day when I wrote analysis plans, I would go to the last one I wrote and copy away. And there's a lot of room for error in there. I think it's a great way to save time and to streamline and to make use of a good solid template, but it runs a risk.
Yeah, and I will fully admit, as medical writers, we do the same thing. I have canned language for certain situations, absolutely. And of course, we work from templates. But I think the trap is when you perceive a product or a protocol to be similar to something you've already done and it actually isn't, and the analyses are different. So, for example, I do a lot of work in vaccines, and the way you analyze immunogenicity for infants and adults is different for different kinds of comparators and disease entities is very different. So on the face of it, it may look exactly study design wise like something you've seen before, but the analyses may be very different. So pay attention again to the analyses that are in the protocol. Somebody probably thought them through, not necessarily, but probably.
And the slightest difference makes a huge impact. So even if you can't even spot, copying and pasting is always a very, very dangerous tool to use. And I just want to put it very clear, medical writers don't just copy and paste from other documents to create their documents. We write them from scratch. We have robust templates, which you should have instructional language within there, which helps you write those, but that should be in a different color. So if you're creating a SAP template, contact your medical writer. They will help you with your template creation so that little mistakes like that shouldn't slip through.
Yeah, and it's just, again, it's telling the team that you care about their analysis and their product because, and again, I've had this experience recently where I'm really trying to get the statisticians to understand the analyses, and I just feel like they're not paying attention because it's all in the protocol, exactly what the sponsor wants done. But they're trying to put, again, a protocol they perceive to be similar, but actually isn't.
Okay, we are moving on to our next bucket, which is all about narratives. And this word gets bounced around a lot, and there's a lot of different narratives that are written. And so we just wanted to take a minute here to think about what is a narrative in the particular scope of a CSR or a CTR. And when do we write them? Why do we write them? How do we end up with large numbers of them? And what happens if we have to write 200 narratives? And then are there any specialized narratives that are involved maybe for oncology or psychedelics? So a lot of questions all wrapped up in this one bullet here. Happy to hear your comments.
I can kick off with the CSR, or as now known, CTR narratives. They tend to be a patient-focused narrative rather than an event-focused narrative. So our pharmacovigilance colleagues will write event narratives. They do not get published, those narratives. So when we write our narratives, we make sure that they're as anonymized as possible so that the patient, subject, participant cannot be identified from them. They are done, as I say, on a patient basis, and they are based on the final TFLs. So the data doesn't come from CM's forms. Best practice is to rewrite these narratives from scratch from the tables, listings, and figures that are produced after database lock.
And so just to clarify, Jules, because I think that's a great point, if a narrative is being written, if a patient has 4 serious adverse events in a trial, our PV colleagues are writing 4 narratives because it's 4 events. Whereas in the clinical study report or clinical trial report, you're going to have one narrative for that patient that's going to condense kind of their journey and what happened to them during the trial.
Is storytelling to the utmost degree for medical writers. It is from when they joined the trial to when they left the trial, and what their purpose, what their journey took with the SAEs or AEs leading to withdrawal, and unfortunately, obviously, with deaths as well.
And it's really important, and at the beginning of a trial, and this is where we really need the support of our biometrics colleagues, to think about, is this a trial that's going to have 0 or 1 narratives? I work in a lot of early phase stuff. That's very often the case. Or is it late phase, huge trial that's going to have 200, 300 narratives? And if the latter is the case, then we really need to think about some programming applications to that, because of course I can write a single narrative from patient from the TFLs that come out from the CSR, but I can do that for 200, but it's going to be very, very hard. So that's where we really often can use some support in getting outputs that support that process. And that's, like everything else, best to talk about as early as possible.
Yeah, so I would say maybe even then at the protocol stage, once you know if it's likely to generate, your study is likely to generate a lot of narratives or not, this is a great time to have the conversation with statistics and programming about how they can support if it crosses a threshold. What about specialized narratives for the case of oncology or psychedelics? Is there anything unique around those fields?
So again, in oncology, in my experience, you often have the kind of narratives that are the bread and butter that Jules has been talking about, are safety narratives. But oncology, sometimes you have efficacy narratives that, again, sort of tell the whole story of the patient from the beginning to the end. And those definitely require some programming support because they're pretty much impossible to write from the TFLs per se. They sort of need a different strategy around how data are presented to enable that writing.
And for psychedelics, you have the abuse potential with the drugs that are being studied, and so the FDA, I know, is asking for AEs of special interest with preferred terms to be included from PV to be included in your CSR. What we're doing here at Worldwide is we're making sure that the medical writer does a review of those narratives and double checks that they are aligned with the TFLs, because as we all know, some data may change from the time that the PV writes their initial narrative to the time we're putting the narrative in our CSRs. And that is a psychedelics requirement at the moment.
Okay, moving on to our next bucket, which is how to share review of documents with medical writing. And so we're going to talk about some of the key documents coming out of data management and statistics and some key milestones. And Jules and Anne, share what you would be looking for when you're looking at this document. So first up is a case report form.
I think you would look, well, as a medical writer, you would look through the case report form to make sure that what you believed was going to be captured from your protocol is actually going to be captured. So you would look at specifically at the endpoints. You would look at the safety as well, if there's AEs of special interest. It follows completely the schedule of assessments, that each visit is captured correctly with the correct assessments. From a medical writing point of view, I mean, obviously, we're looking at it that it matches what we believed we wrote.
Yes, exactly. So I'm sort of always looking at it from two directions when I look at the CRF. The direction you're talking about, having been the protocol writer, does it do all those things that you said, Jules? But I think, and I'm sure you're doing this as well and almost don't even think about it, you're also thinking about the messages that you think are going to be in the CSR, the key messages the sponsor is going to want to have. So I'm looking to see that the data are actually collected in a way that support that message, in the best possible world. So.
Great points there, I think, with the continuity of the story, right? I think that a clinical trial is one of the greatest stories ever told, but you never know how it's going to end, but you know how you want it to go. And so I think as you pull out that story from the protocol and you're already thinking ahead to what's the ending in the CSR, and I think that's a great point. All right, next up is the statistical analysis plan and the mock TFLs. What are you looking for there?
Again, consistency with the protocol for sure. And I think, again, both sides. And also, am I going to be able to say what I think I'm going to want to say in the CSR?
And am I being provided with what I thought I was going to be provided to write my CSR?
Right. And again, the whole language thing, is the language consistent with the protocol? Are they using our term like participants or patients? Have they said sex or gender, depending on what we said we were going to collect? All of those kinds of things as well.
Okay, dry run output. And dry run is just a run of all of the tables, figures, and listings pretty well ahead of database locks, so everybody can see what they look like. Tables look different with numbers than they do with X's when you are writing that SAP. And so the dry run is a very important milestone. And so what are you guys looking for when you get that stack?
I think you're already looking at how you're going to formulate your section on your efficacy section, especially within your CSR. If that dry run data is how you thought it was going to appear, how would then reassign and how you're going to write your efficacy section. Your safety section and your demographic section of CSRs tend to be pretty much similar all the way through, but it's the efficacy section that dry run really helps.
And for both dry run and blinded data review, which we're going to talk about in a minute, I'm, as well as those things, I'm also looking for things that don't make sense. So, and unfortunately for me as a freelancer, and maybe Jules has this better than I'm often coming in at the last minute after all these processes are done. And it's very frustrating to me because I could have foreseen some problems that are going to be in the CSR and mitigated them. And sometimes they're the simplest things that end up really causing a sponsor a lot of problems. So I'm also looking for anomalous data. If the disposition data tell me that a patient was, a participant, was discontinued because of an AE. Can I find an AE in the database that said that the person was discontinued? If that AE doesn't exist, that's a real problem in writing a CSR. Or vice versa. You have one where it says they were discontinued. You've got to write the narrative for that, and in fact, they weren't discontinued. And how do you deal with that? So those are, I think, some of the things I'm really, and sort of every time I'm brought in late in the process, even in a small study, there's one of those like crazy things I have to write somehow saying, yeah, this patient was discontinued because of an AE, but he didn't actually have an AE, and no, I can't really explain that. It's really tough.
While I think it's more tricky for freelancers, I think it follows for most medical writers. We dip in and out of projects. We're not on the project all the way through, even in a CRO. So we rely on our biometrics colleagues, especially, to fill us in what's happened from the protocol to the CSR if there hasn't been an amendment. We need that information, which obviously we won't have because we haven't been involved up till then.
Yeah, and I think if you're in a full service CRO or a CRO that has medical writing that's doing the data, it's a key point for statisticians and data managers as you're circulating your documents for review. Make sure that they run by the medical writer. Even if there isn't one assigned yet, you can reach out to the head of medical writing and say, hey, we have this coming up. Can you review it? A lot of times, review of the analysis plan by medical writing is part of the SOPs in statistics. And so it's important to make sure that you get that. And the dry run output the same way. And so if you are working and you know your company isn't doing the medical writing, when you're writing the SAP, when you're producing dry run, this is a great time to say to your sponsor, hey, do you have your medical writer who can come in and review these? And just make sure you're getting the medical writer involved. And if they don't have a medical writer, take the time to just note what that risk means. It doesn't get rid of the risk. The risk is still
Here's
there.
What's gonna happen. Yeah, I love that idea.
You're still going to have to work around it at the end when you don't have any more time to deal with this crazy data. However, you do have documented that you acknowledge the risk and that they bought into it, and sometimes that's helpful. And then the last one here is the blinded data review meeting, which is a little bit different than dry run. A dry run output could be used for the blinded data review meeting, but particularly in later phase trials, before you unblind that data, you're going to do a review of what you are seeing and make sure you're defining populations correctly, refer to any protocol deviations and violations, kind of nail those down and make sure they're being treated correctly and consistently throughout the analysis. I think this is a great time to bring medical writing in to be a part of that. And Jules and Anne, tell us why that might be.
I think, and again, here I'm really looking for anomalous data at this point that all the data are in. So I'm looking at the interaction between disposition and protocol deviations and analysis populations, and that those things all make sense together, and that they also make sense with the ends that I see in the efficacy and safety tables. Because again, having to fix those things after you've locked the database is less than ideal. It eats into time. It eats into credibility once you're fixing things in an unblinded fashion. So I just really would like to be at the table and helping at that point, because I think I'm generally the only person who's looking at it from that point of view.
Yeah, I think so. The medic will be looking at things from a medical anomaly. We're looking at it from and writing up the results anomaly. So there is a difference.
Yes, I think a lot of data issues make perfect sense and are perfectly explainable within the context of data management, and then they become perfectly explainable in the context of programming and statistics as you're generating those TFLs. And then medical writing has to figure out a way to make them perfectly explainable to a regulatory agency, perhaps.
But without undermining the overall quality that you want the project to appear that it has. And that's always, I often in a review meetings have someone say, well, this is what happened. And I'll say, okay, but that doesn't add to the picture of quality that we're trying to build, so. how
No,
do we
okay.
explain it?
Moving on to review cycles. So better review cycles for medical writing documents. We've got a couple points here to discuss. And one is, please provide specific comments.
Yeah, the most unhelpful comments that a medical writer can receive is a question mark as a comment, or please rewrite, or I don't understand this. Those comments help us in no way at all. We understand that there is something that you don't like about that particular section or that particular sentence, but we need guidance on what it is that we're doing wrong. We're not mind readers. We are wonderful people, but we're not mind readers, and so we can't, and that doesn't help us. So then it's taking time up from the other review cycles as well, because then we're going back to the person who put a question mark and asking them to explain, eating into our timelines. And medical writers are often crunched on their timelines. At the end of a study, everyone wants that CSR as quickly as possible. So comments like that hinder us rather than help us.
And I will underline what Jules said. I did not include mind reading among my skills that medical writers must have. We don't do that. I think sometimes people are loath to actually revise the text. And perhaps sometimes that's people who are not comfortable in English or just aren't comfortable with their writing. So I always say, if you don't feel comfortable actually editing the text, just put what you want in the comment bubble. I'll fix it. I'm not going to like put in a grammatical mistake just because you did. Don't worry about it. That's my job. But just put in the sentence you think how as it should read in a comment bubble, and then we can work with that much better than a question mark or I don't understand this.
Yeah. And also to make sure that if you're sending to a external medical writer, so you're the sponsor company or you're sending those comments, please make sure they're consolidated, because if John says I like this and Jane says I don't like this, what does the medical writer do? We need to know what is your decision about a particular sentence. Again, we're not mind readers. We don't know which is the comment that has actual priority over the others.
Yeah, that makes our lives really hard when there's a whole conversation going on in the comments. And to be frank, I think old scores are getting settled and people are trying to prove how smart they are, and nobody actually tells me what to do. So what can be helpful, depending on the size of the group or whatever, is if there's someone who goes through it at the end, sort of, and says, do this with this, or this is the right answer, ignore this person. Well, probably wouldn't put that in writing, but someone who curates the comments can be very useful as a last pass on a big document, an important document.
It can be, and I also think roundtable reviews are kind of old school. But if you are on a time crunch, getting the key stakeholders in a room and adjudicating those comments, and no one leaves the room until they're adjudicated, then you can really streamline management of that. However, the medical writer can be much more prepared for that meeting if they've received a consolidated document one single document that has all of the consolidated comments in it.
And I hope over time, like you say about things being old school, we've kind of worked past that. I'm very committed to coming to a comments review resolution meeting, having resolved 95% of the comments and just really focusing on the things that are still questions. And I kind of pride myself on having the shortest comment resolution meetings that you can have. So I hope people maybe have gone through that painful process of the way that it has been done in the past, going through every comment, and hopefully try not to be scared and trepidatious about these meetings. I think people have gotten a lot better at them.
I agree. Okay, here's my favorite point, or one of my favorite points. Final is final, and you can talk about this from a couple of angles. So Jules, Anne, when you see final is final, what do you want people to take from that?
Well, I will take from the source documents, and then we can talk about the reviewing documents. We need final documents as our source documents, not nearly final, not drafty final, not, oh, well, we're only going to make a couple more edits, but you can use this as your starting point. No, we deal with final documents. We have to, for our quality's sake. So if you make a slight change in something that is going to lead into your protocol, and that has changes all over the protocol document, we might miss one. We much prefer to have that final document and to make sure that our quality is maintained.
And it also takes longer. It's not it actually hits at 2 points. It hits at time and quality. It takes longer, and I produce a less good product. And it doesn't save the time that people think it's good. Sorry, it doesn't save the time that people think it's going to save.
No, not at all. And the other thing is, if we create a final document, please don't go in and fiddle. Please don't go and say just one more comment when we've published it and we've distributed it and we've sent it out for signature and someone said, let's just add one more comment or just change that, because then you have to redo everything again. Final is final. But we've made all those decisions. We've had all those discussions. This is the final document that's being signed.
And I think what enables that is, this is actually a point I think we should have included, is to treat every review cycle, hopefully there are only 2, as important. Give full time to the first draft. Don't just say it's the first draft, it's not going to be well written, I don't really care until the second draft. Really put your energy into the first draft, really put your energy into the second draft. And that's what mitigates the kinds of problems Jules is talking about.
And if you're being sent a CSR shell, for example, the protocol and the SAP driven sections of your CSR, please review them before we start doing the results, because going back to your protocol amendments in your beginning sections of your CSR, when we're on the final draft and you're just meant to be signing it off, that is not the time for review of those documents, of that section. That section should happen before database lock, before we even start looking at results.
Not the least is that we don't want to spend the time and energy to go back and do it, but also because it then drives the results section. So if I've misunderstood when writing the shell, if I've misunderstood an analysis, or I've misunderstood about how something was collected, that misunderstanding will probably drive how I set up the results section in the first draft. So again, it all just feeds into our ability to get to final as soon as possible by doing the early work.
And the CSR shell is often the first chance that the medical writer gets to meet the full study team. So that CSR shell, while it's seen in a lot of examples as a sort of like the admin part of the CSR, it's actually where you're building that communication. You're learning about the people you're working with. You're learning about how they are going to review, so you can maybe train people a little bit better for when you're writing the results section. So it's a really important part of the CSR writing.
It's foundational to a well-crafted story and a expedited timeline, I would say. Okay, which is kind of links very nicely to our next bucket, which is processes. Processes and timelines support quality documents. So comments and points to consider on this one.
I think just medical writing are quite process structured and process focused. I know that within my department, we'll make sure that everyone knows at the beginning of writing a document when it's going through QC, when it's going to go for a particularly internal review, which is where my biometrics colleagues are working on it, when it's going externally to the client, how long everybody's got within that time period to review that document, and when I expect it or the team expects it back. That's really important, because we've built those timelines with the end date in mind. If we have a review that comes 2 days late and we've already updated based on everybody else's comments, then you're putting our timelines back considerably. As I say, we're very process orientated, and that process is being developed to create quality documents.
And I think, so as I sort of said, pay attention to the shell, pay attention to the first draft. There's a reason we do these, both sort of technical reasons or, as Amanda described, sort of team cultural reasons. We're getting to know each other. We're getting to know how we want to work together. If you don't understand why we're doing a process in a certain way, or why we're insisting on reviewing a shell, for example, ask, and we're happy to explain what our experience is in why that works. And I think often that is experiences it's drawn from when something didn't work. That they're mostly I think a lot of my processes come out of when things went wrong.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
That's everybody's process. And I think that concern about the reason you're doing a review is a great time to ask. And you also have a concern just about the timeline, because you've got something else that's also taking a lot of your time that week. Again, knowledge is power. So I like to say, if you just told your medical writer, like, hey, I'm going to be a day late because I have this other thing, they know and they can adjust. So it's, just if you have a concern with their timeline or why, or what is the goal of your document, just talk to the medical writer, because you guys are all working on the same team with the same end goal. And they just need to know. Okay, this is a great one coming up next, because this one goes across biometrics. I think for me, QC is a critical, not a skippable step.
We should never allow a document of any form, whether it's a medical writing document, it's a SAP, it's TFLs, or CRF, to go to anybody who's not part of your little circle, medical writing circle or stats circle, that hasn't gone through a QC. You don't want to show somebody else your stupid mistakes, and we all make them. So correct them, make sure that they're corrected before we show ourselves to anyone else. So yeah, QC at every step is paramount, especially for medical writing, because we need to check for consistency, we need to check formatting, we need to check spelling, grammar, the really basic things, but they show a true quality of a document.
And I think as much as medical writing, the whole of medical writing, including QC, is always at the end of a very long process in which, to be frank, many timelines have been missed. Enrollment didn't start on time. Enrollment didn't end on time. Various things happened. The database took longer to clean than we thought. But that the end timeline, particularly in a submission, generally doesn't move. So medical writing is often the functional area that gets quite compressed. And when it gets compressed, the bit that gets really compressed is QC. And QC doesn't get adequate time to do their job. And I guess perhaps what I'm asking for in actionable messages is if you can be an advocate for that, an advocate for giving medical writing in general enough time, but an advocate for giving QC enough time within that. It is not skippable. It is not it is critical, and it cannot be skipped, and it cannot be compressed.
Yeah, I think I in all of my years, and we have a lot of years of experience on this discussion today, I can't ever recall anything ever happening quicker because we tried to condense the QC, right? If we do a parallel review with the sponsor, it doesn't go well because they see all of the mistakes that we would have caught with our internal QC, or you skip QC because you think you don't have time, but then somebody notices something after the whole thing has been published and it's a critical error and has to be fixed, and it ends up costing time. So I think if we just take the deep breath and do the extra, business day, 2, 3, whatever, to get through the QC, everybody is happier in the long run and the time moves faster.
And I think we just have to make it very clear that QC is paramount. So QC is important from a synopsis to the main body of a report. It's not the peer review. It's not a medical writing review. It's making sure that document is of a quality that you are prepared to put your name to. So peer review, a medical writer will review your document from a medical writing point of view. That potentially could be skipped if you're a senior writer. QC can't. You have to make sure that document is consistent and is of a good quality.
Okay, last bucket. So we're going to try and get this one done in about 5 minutes. Communication, and if anybody knows me, they know I am communication. I love communication. You need to be communicating with people and saying what you think, and not just thinking that they know what you think. So the piece here that I've written is make sure medical writing is included on all updates, timeline shifts, and milestone requirements.
Just to reiterate Jules' point, we are not mind readers, and we need to know these things. And even, I think an important point to just follow up on something Amanda was saying, when you see the initial timelines from a medical writer, at a kickoff meeting or whatever your technology is, this is when the drafts are coming, this is when your reviews are. Don't sit quiet, don't sit silently if you can't make those timelines. That does not help anyone. If that's your holiday, or if you know you have another competing project, please communicate that early. Let us rework the timelines. Let us ask the client or the management, what are priorities? How should we do these things, and allow things to be rearranged? That's, to me, sort of one of the most crucial communications. And I think people sometimes keep quiet because they're trying to be a team player, but that's not really helping.
Yeah, and I think that also for the CSR, our final TFLs are the date that is like our Bible. That's the date that we need to know. That's the date we will start writing our results. If there's going to be a change in them, please let us know. If it's going to move by 2-3 days, you might not think it has a big impact, but that's probably 2 or 3 days that is cut off the medical writing time because the client has a particular date that they need that CSR finalized. So if you let us know, then we can resource, or we can try and cut some time from other areas that we're doing. So yeah, communicate with us, let us know what's going on. If there is, especially if there's something in the middle of the trial that that's going on, and that your medical writer will be working on this project at the end, let them know. Just keep sending them emails, keep sending them information. Too much information is not a thing for a medical writer.
Yeah, it takes nothing to add medical writer into a CC on an email, and they can decide if that is going to be relevant for them as they are telling the story in a clinical trial, or if we're thinking on a program-wide document, if we're thinking about a CTD module, they can decide what they're going to do with that information. But you need to not take that agency, I guess, away from them and let them have the information to make their decisions. Okay, next up on communication, medical writing knows their documents. Have a question? Just ask.
I think this comes back to protocols, doesn't it? Especially, so medical writer will have spent quite a lot of time with the client in discussions when we're writing the synopsis. We know what decisions led to being in the protocol. So ask us, why is this like this? To ask us, then to go particularly to the client, because we should all be talking together. We're one team. Biometrics and medical writing are one team. So ask us the question. We can give you the answer if we know it.
Yeah, absolutely. Medical writers are, I think, in general, very detail-oriented people, and we do know the protocol, particularly protocol we've written, but even a protocol we've kind of reviewed to write a CSR, we know them inside out and the whys and wherefores.
All right, last point is confirm medical writing has access to all necessary documents.
Yeah, so quite often somebody will say, can you review this for me? So can you review an ICF? Well, we need the protocol. If you haven't got the protocol, how can you review an ICF? And that's the most basic level of review of why we need all the necessary documents. We need all the protocol amendments and all the SAPs and SAP amendments and the changes to analysis and the interim analysis when we're writing our CSR. So provide them to us so that we've got everything. We don't keep asking for things and bothering people for what we need.
Definitely. Just don't assume, because again, as a freelancer, I'm often coming in quite late, even in a CRO, as Jules has said, you sort of drop in and out of projects. You don't know everything that's happened. So just don't assume that we do, and don't know that we assume that we know things about, for example, like interim analyses or safety review committee decisions or things like that. If you know about them and there's documentation that we're going to need, and file notes. Somebody will always sort of say, oh, we didn't know about that. It was in a file note. Well, how would I have known? So if you know these key documents are out there, then please send them along. If we don't need them, we don't need them. People send me files of 20 file notes and only one of them is important. That is not a waste of my time to read 19 unimportant file notes to find the one important one.
Okay.
Never too much information for medical writers.
I think that's my final takeaway from today is you can't talk to medical writing enough and you can't give them too much information. But Jules, and what are the final thoughts that you want people to understand about working better with medical writing?
Well, I think medical writers are known as medical communicators. So we communicate well, but we want to be communicated with well as well. So keep us informed of what's going on. Let us know your thoughts on what we've written in a clear and concise manner, and include us as part of the team. We do drop in and out of projects, but we are still part of the team and we want to work with you on that basis.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It's all about communication. And I think like every functional group, the different biometrics functional groups, your operational people, your medics, everybody's coming at this from a different point of view. Medical writer has their own point of view about things. So you may not think that that is a relevant issue or something they need to know about, but please let us know, because it may very well be something that we need to know about. And I just keep, even a year or two before CSR, I just keep those things in a file that says CSR. They're all there. All that communication is there when I need to refer to it again.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jules and Anne, for bringing your experience to the discussion. And thank you to everyone who has watched this live or caught up on the replay. The Biometrics Leadership Lab will be taking December off and will return in the new year. If you have a topic idea or would like to be a guest, please just message me. And thank you again for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.